So very warm good afternoon from the UAE to our joint webinar that we have the pleasure to organize with our friends and colleagues from IWS and from the Association of German Chambers of Commerce and Industry, DIHK. My name is Oliver Oehms. I'm talking to you standing in my office in Dubai, different from what my background might suggest. But I'm fine with both because we have offices either in Dubai as well as in Abu Dhabi. It's a great pleasure to discuss and finally conclude with you in the next 90 minutes the future of logistics. Obviously a little bit hubristic, presumptuous you might say, that we have the intention to define and shape how logistics will look like in the next years to come. But we are doing so against the background of the EXPO 2020. And yes, indeed, EXPO is happening. That's the $1 billion question that I had to respond to many, many times in the last couple of weeks. Dubai is getting ready for EXPO starting on the 1st of October. And so is international travel, as I had the pleasure to experience myself when coming back from Germany just last night. We would like also to use the opportunity of our very high level list of speakers today to, let's say, discuss with you, dear participants, as well, how a post-COVID logistics might look like. And we, wherever possible, would like to do so as well by, well, seeing where the United Arab Emirates might play a role in this endeavor, looking into the role the UAE has had for many years already as a hub for the Gulf region first, but secondly also for a much larger region nowadays. And having said so, I'm especially happy that Mohsen Ahmad is with us from Dubai South. And I have to admit, I'm especially curious to hear from you, dear Mohsen, what Dubai South is working on. But I'm just a humble moderator, therefore I would first of all like to invite the senior representatives of our co-organizers to address their words of welcome to all of us. First in line, Professor Dr. Federico Fodas. Dr. Fodas.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Federico Fodas. I'm the president of the Internationaler Wirtschaftssenat. I'd like to give all participants a very warm welcome to this timely event which the Internationaler Wirtschaftssenat is hosting together with the German Emirati Joint Council for Industry and Commerce and the Association of German Chambers of Industry and Commerce. The future of logistics, sustainable and competitive post-COVID solutions for EXPO 2020 and beyond. In the globalized economy of the 21st century, the logistics industry has become an essential part of supply chain management at all levels of business. Getting the right product to the right place at the right time, B2B and B2C, is what logistics is about. It is an area of rapid technical progress where not only artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and many other good ideas make a difference in warehousing and transportation for customer service excellence. Sustainable and environmental friendly business models are also definitely pushing the logistics industry into the limelight. Although the pandemic directly affected the industry, the indication is that it is moving fast to recover lost markets and to find new ones. I'm very much looking forward to the presentations and discussions of the most pressing issues in the industry and of the great potential to be tapped in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Fodas. Now I would like to address Detlef Daus, who is not only very active in DIHK, but he is Mr. MRO here in the Gulf region. Detlef, a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Oliver. Dear Professor Federico Foders, dear Oliver Oehms, honorable speakers and guests from the international business community, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you from the Association of German Chambers of Commerce and Industry, the DIHK. From our point of view, this event is once again an important milestone for a fantastic cooperation with the World Economic Council, the German Emirati Joint Council for Industry and Commerce, AHK UAE, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. A great joint venture in 2021, just at the right time to prepare for one of the most important events this year, the EXPO 2020 in Dubai. Thank you to all our partners and speakers for realizing this webinar together in challenging times. The slogan of the EXPO Dubai, connecting minds, creating future, is up to date, forward-looking, and needed at the same time. Today, we will discuss the future of logistics, sustainable and competitive post-COVID solutions for EXPO 2020 and beyond. For the last months, COVID-19 has shown us that supply chains, logistics, as well as personal mobility are facing new challenges. Logistics, transportation, and mobility build, so to say, the nerve center of our global and connected economy. Our economies need to find answers and new ways to face these challenges in order to become more resilient and sustainable for the present and the future. As an entrepreneur with more than 40 years of experience in GCC, I have witnessed, accompanied, and shaped, at least a little bit, industrial supply chains foremost in Saudi Arabia, but also in the UAE and Oman. Some of the logistic dinosaurs like me might remember that in the early 80s, the most reliable, cost-effective, and fast, clear transportation was to charter a truck for 6,500 German marks and deliver in 10 days, inclusive custom clearance from Hanover to Dammam. We chartered the Guppy to fly in the complete boiler station for the Gubra desalination and power plant in Sultanate of Oman to fulfill the wish of Sultan Qaboos to inaugurate the plant at the National Day. A lot has been achieved in the meantime, and in some cases, our local partners have been benchmarking institutional and procedural developments. Just look, for instance, at the fantastic infrastructure, soft and hard, that we are relying on in the UAE. Like hardly any other region, the GCC has been able to adapt to global challenges and trends, not at least during the recent pandemic. But for sure, much more is to come and much more can be expected. I'm glad that we have a fantastic lineup of experts from all relevant sectors to discuss questions like what are global logistic developments and concepts which are already implemented. Talking about sustainable transportation solutions, which are trends and visions are driving your company. Which effects have digitalizations and mobility 4.0 for logistics, as especially for a local value proposition? What develops do we see in GCC, the UAE, and what could we learn from our Emirati and Saudi partners? Last but not least, I hope to see you all and inshallah physically at the Expo in Dubai this year. The AHK UAE, led by Oliver Oehms, is an important partner of the Expo Dubai and the official German pavilion. If you have not done so yet, just get in touch with Oliver and his fantastic team. They will support you in making your way to the UAE and the Expo Dubai. I want to stop here and hand over again to our moderator, Oliver Oehms. Shukran.
Shukran, lieber Detlef, thank you very much. Just to set one thing right, we cannot physically transport people to the UAE. this is in the good hands of our friends from Lufthansa. Thank you for being with us. I would now like to invite Mohsen Ahmad for his words of welcome. And I know that Mohsen, you will be joining for the discussion later on. Glad to have you with us.
Good morning to the folks in Germany. Good afternoon to the people watching us from Dubai. Thank you, Oliver, for the introduction. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank the AHK and IWS for giving us sort of the opportunity to sort of present Dubai and sort of what of our plans and in particularly to the logistics sector. Personally, I've been in the logistics sector working in Dubai for the last sort of 20 years. I guess I won't be as much as what was mentioned earlier in terms of my experience. I'm learning quite a lot with the, and I'm here to sort of learn more in terms of some of the logistics experience that's going to be shared. I think one of the challenging time that was my previous speakers have said was during the COVID, that we did have quite a lot of challenges and quite sort of an interesting, but as always, the logistics teams globally have always been sort of used to responding and being very agile to sort of the situation. And people, yes, we always look at the sort of the frontline team that worked on the sort of the medical staff, but also I think the hats off to the people in our industry for the great job they did in ensuring that the supplies of everything, being it from the PPEs, also from all the safety equipment, and the sort of the cleaning, and now most importantly the sort of the vaccines were delivered, and that's again predominantly was what the logistics industry did, and we're sort of quite thankful for that approach. Now, in going back to sort of the theme of getting the EXPO and people sort of within the logistics, and particularly about the mobility side of it, luckily there will be logistics will be present on various stages during the EXPO. For the sake of I don't know, that's why I will not mention any names of any of these events at the moment, but we will have at least a couple of German sort of focused event related to EXPO that will related to logistics during the EXPO that will take place. Now, GCC or the Middle East has seen sort of a significant sort of challenges when it came, but I think one of the opportunities has always been there is always a growth. We're looking at the sort of the global logistics, we're expecting for it to grow about 4.7% up to sort of 2024, 2025. But within this region, you're seeing quite a lot of growth, and mainly with the sort of the e-commerce has played an important role. We recently see sort of 20% growth in the e-commerce in the UAE. Where they're becoming sort of and quite an interesting sector that quite a lot of focus has been there. But I think what I will do right now for the sort of to get the discussion moving forward, I just wanted to put this across that sort of the infrastructure to deal with the logistics in the Middle East, or in particularly UAE and Dubai, have been very crucial with what during the pandemic, and I think has been crucial pre-pandemic, and I'm sure they will play a major role going forward after the pandemic. And certainly there are some areas that we are seeing growth from a sector, but also we're also looking at the region being young and very much connected to internet shows sort of quite a lot of potential for new ideas, new opportunities. And I think what's sort of the SMEs that are involved would definitely benefit a lot in expanding into the market. I'll leave it up to there, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Mohsen Ahmad, and I'm looking forward to integrate you later on in the discussion. So I pick up some of the buzzwords that you mentioned. I like the idea of a young region, which makes me feel very old, as I'm kind of the same age like the UAE. But indeed, or effectively, there are already some very well-established elements of an infrastructure, which first of all makes the UAE so resilient. This is what we have experienced in the last year or so. And secondly, also, this is the backbone of what I think would be let's say, the model of a UAE logistics 2.0. And I'm therefore especially glad that we have, so to say, the whole picture of the logistics industry with us. We have Jon Haugen from Lufthansa Cargo. We have Pierre Timmermans from DB Cargo, Deutsche Bahn Cargo. We have Ralf Schreiber from DHL. Needless to introduce DHL to you. And last but not least, we have Jörg Sonne from Hapag-Lloyd, Middle East Shipping, obviously the shipping line. And talking about infrastructure, we have the fantastic airport, but we also have with DP World, one of the world's leading, let's say, owner of harbor and ports infrastructure. That's a challenge indeed, let's say, to elaborate on all details of the logistics industry, but nevertheless, I will give it a try, but not without inviting our 4 panelists for the individual pitches. The first in line would be Pierre Timmermans. Pierre is a member of the board of DB Cargo AG. Pierre, looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Oliver Ohms. Let me just start with introducing DB Cargo a little bit. Maybe I can see the first chart. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Yeah, you can switch to the next one. This is part of Germany. It's very green today with lots of rain, so it will be green for a number of days, I guess. But DB Cargo, Deutsche Bahn Cargo, we are #1 European freight cargo rail freight company. Just a small overview. We got a market share of about 20% in Europe. We got a network that goes from the south of Spain to the north of Sweden, and from the Netherlands all the way to Romania. So that's our goal, not only to focus on 1 or 2 countries, but to be the partner of choice for those who have a pan-European logistics needs, rail-based logistics needs. We focus on a number of industries that are of particular interest and that have a good opportunity for rail. And one of them, for instance, is the car industry and the steel industry, who transport massive amounts of goods over long distances with a high need for punctuality. That's where we see our home turf. We produce customized product solutions. So, for instance, also in building infrastructure, bridges, roads, etc., etc. We have specialized solutions with a team that can provide these solutions. Our largest, I would say, investment after locomotives, who are relatively expensive, is IT. We believe that in the future, the battle is being won or lost, not on having iron or having wagons, but on having a very good IT solution that gives a handshake to the IT solutions of our customers. And then, last but not least, and I will dwell a bit upon that in the next chart, we are definitely the greenest transport sector. One train replaces about 52 trucks. So if we talk about sustainability, if we talk about the future and CO2 reduction, a train is even more CO2 friendly than a deep sea vessel going from the Middle East to Europe, for instance. Doing that, we today run about 3,600 trains per day. We replace 22 million truck runs per year, and we today save 7 million tons of CO2, and there's more to come. Definitely more to come. But we are at the heart, I would say, of a development that values and fosters sustainability and CO2 reduction. Maybe next slide. If we then look at some of the developments we have today, and we have as a logistics industry, if it's rail, if it's deep sea, if it's even air cargo, then there are a number of developments that we have to cater to. The first, of course, is the European Green Deal that obliges all of us to really significantly reduce CO2 reduction. And from a German, if I may say so, perspective, it's almost virtually impossible if we don't reach a massive rail to road transfer. Then that is a major contributor to the European, and also I would say to the German policies and plans of the government, and definitely going forward. The second one is a picture we all know, I think, and it has to do with a further need with more and more shock waves coming through the systems, through the logistic systems, intercontinental, European, that we have to cater to. I just give an example, the Evergreen Ever Given. The day after we started loading trains from Shanghai to Hamburg, for instance, in order to make sure that mission and time critical cargo could be transported over rail. The second one is that after the Evergreen Given was freed up, there was, and I think my colleague from Hapag-Lloyd can confirm, that there was a massive congestion in all European ports, and we tried our best, and we have been successful, I think, together with our customers in making sure that once these containers that had been stuck for a while in the Suez Canal, once they arrived in Rotterdam or in Hamburg or in Bremerhaven, then they were speeded up and in a very swift and fast fashion being moved to the final customers. Then we see, the COVID development that was a shock wave to various logistic systems. We've seen that the total, for instance, Asia to Europe came to a halt. We've also seen that within Europe there were queues of tens of hundreds of kilometers before border crossings. For instance, between Germany and Poland, and between Italy and Switzerland and Germany. And we've tried to improvise and to make sure that the train could be an alternative for the truck, and that there would be an ongoing supply chain of, for instance, Italian pasta going to the German supermarkets, etc. So also in the future, we think that there will be a further need for resilience of supply chains, and that rail can form a crucial element here. And the same goes, we've seen Brexit, there were queues, there were even truck drivers were beating up each other on both sides of the canal, and we tried to solve it by having one loco driver replacing 52 truck drivers, and making sure that mission critical goods were transported between the continent and the UK. So resilience and an answer to challenges, that's where we see at least a role for rail and a role for DB Cargo. Maybe next slide. Then there was a question for some propositions, maybe for later discussions, and we've picked out 3 of them. And one is nearshoring as a new trend. We've seen supply chains being vulnerable between China and Europe, and we think that, and we already see that large customers of ours are considering to have at least part of their production in the east, but maybe not in the Far East. So rather it would be on the European outskirts in Central Eastern Europe instead of the Far East being China. Well, a need for more sustainability, that's almost a legal given, and it's a CO2 reduction that we've all, and our governments have all committed to. And I think where we, as the logistics system, whether it's ocean, whether it's air, whether it's road, or in a combination, we need to cater to. And we already see that large customers really need from us, for instance, a CO2 certificate in order to make sure that we live up to our expectations and commitments to customers and society. And the third one, even if the sustainability topic seems to be a bit further away, there will be a cost advantage in using a low CO2 reduction mode of transport, because what we can see, and the German discussion today, even in the newspaper, is about massively increasing prices of fuel, will definitely make benefit for those modes of transport that have a relatively low carbon footprint. So that's, from my point of view, for my part, an overview of where we think logistics is moving and the challenges that we have ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pierre Timmermans. I took a number of notes. I especially would like to elaborate in the discussion later on what you call the resilience of supply chains. You mentioned nearshoring and the very important Green Deal. Sorry, I just refilled my car back home in Germany before returning it to the rental station in Frankfurt. And I was shocked how much I had to pay for 1 liter of gasoline, €1.70. Imagine that.
Oh, but, next time go to the Netherlands and to Schiphol. You pay €2.
Okay. So luckily I flew from Frankfurt to Dubai. Thank you very much, Pierre Timmermans. The next, and we move forward in alphabetical order. After DB is DHL. Ralf Schreiber. Ralf, you're sitting very close here in Dubai.
Sorry, I was still on mute. I hope you can see my screen already. So my topic for the next 10 minutes is the DHL sustainability roadmap, because as Pierre just mentioned, it's hopefully on the agenda of everybody right now, and it's becoming more and more a top agenda topic for our largest customers around the world. And sustainability is not a new topic. Some companies like us started talking about that already 10 years ago. But the question was always, what is now then the detailed roadmap? Because everyone talks about sustainability, but a lot of companies struggle. What do we really do with it? Yeah. So I want to share with you in a few slides the ideas that DHL brought up forward to that topic. So the company doesn't obviously need an introduction, but just to highlight some key figures, we are now 570,000 employees around the world. Just food for thought. Imagine if 10% of this stuff can work from home in future. That's 50,000 people less commuting. So this is also a topic of sustainability that many have not even thought about. The less we commute and the more we allow tele-remote working, then obviously less traffic, less CO2 emissions, etc. So group revenues exceeded 66 billion, and the EBIT for this year was 4.8 million. And so I'm standing here representing the global forwarding side. So we moved like 3 million tons of air freight last year. To put this into relation, this is like full 30,000 747 flights within a year. Yeah, and this is just talking about the air freight, obviously the ocean freight, and then the road freight. And as Pierre already highlighted, the rail from Shanghai to Europe is one of our fast-selling products at the moment. Since Jörg's ships are all full at the moment, the rail has really gained a lot of share and is a very good alternative now on the continent, which also reduces obviously CO2 emissions compared to the expensive air freight that we usually fly. So this is part of the key figures. So Frank Appel is our CEO, and he also made it on his top level on his personal agenda. And sustainability has to be an integral part of every company's strategy, because we have to ensure that the world will continue rotating, and we all have a role and an obligation in that. Yeah. So talking about our track record so far, so we claim that we were the first logistics company that offered climate-friendly products. As I said, the topic is more than 10 years old on our agenda. We trained more than 70,000 employees, meanwhile, that are certified green specialists. So they need to know all our green products. They need to know how to reduce carbon emissions. In Germany, the German street scooter is quite popular. The electric delivery car that DHL is using, we meanwhile have 18,000 of them. It was our own manufacturing. You might wonder, why did you produce our own cars? Well, no OEM in the world was providing a car specified to our needs. So with the university in Aachen, we developed our own car, and it's quite a success. Obviously, we try to purchase green electricity worldwide wherever possible. And our ambition to be zero emission by 2050, we say ambition because part of that journey, some inventions have not been done yet. I will explain a little bit more in detail what the detailed agenda for that 2050 is. So sustainability is clearly embedded in our global corporate strategy. So we have 3 pillars. We want to be the provider of choice for our customers. We want to be employer of choice for our employees and provide a healthy and enjoyable work environment. And obviously, both will not work without the investment of choice. We want to be also the preferred investment for our shareholders and for our long-term shareholders. Yeah, the purpose is quite royal: connecting people, improving lives. As Mohsen mentioned in the beginning, I was personally quite busy in organizing vaccine deliveries all around the world, in particular Middle East and Africa. We delivered a lot of PPE equipment in thousands of charter flights around the world last year. So obviously during the pandemic, the shipping lines, rail operators, airlines, and freight forwarders had really a major role to keep things moving, despite the fact that a lot of equipment was not moving anymore since all the passenger aircraft were grounded. Yeah. So DHL wants to be the logistics company of the world. And we combine here, obviously, our different business units, the parcel and mail that everyone knows, the express, the global forwarding, but also the supply chain colleagues that offer then very creative warehouse solutions all around the world. So what's the sustainability roadmap of DHL? So first of all, clean operations for climate protection. Clean operations is obviously a high target, considering that the majority of our operation is actually emitting CO2, right? All the containers around the world, the air freight, the ocean freight, the last mile delivery is all emitting CO2 emissions. You cannot move cargo without emitting CO2. Yeah. Being the great company to work for all, having also sustainable solutions for our employees, and also being part of the local communities, in particular in Africa, where DHL goes far beyond being just a local employee or employer, but also participating in community activities to make our operation in Africa a better place for living. Yeah. And obviously a high trusted company, so compliance is in particular Middle East and Africa, a very high topic, but also highly trusted when we, for example, talk about our sustainability solution, that it's also audited by an external party. Yeah. And we mentioned, for example, the trade-off certificates earlier in Pierre's presentation. So I go straight, considering the time, to that slide here. So DHL is committed that we will invest more than 7 billion until 2030 in clean operations. And we have committed to reduce our CO2 emissions by 29 million tons. There's a science-based target initiative. One of the founding companies of that was the founder of IKEA. And you can apply to this organization, and then you can not just throw green targets into the world, but targets which are science-based, which are achievable with the means available. Yeah. And we, for example, have targeted a reduction of 30% in our aviation fuels, or to use more than 30% of sustainable aviation fuels in our own fleet. So not everyone knows, but the DHL itself owns around 290 aircraft right now. So how do we want to achieve that? So there are alternative fuels to the normal kerosene used, alternative fuels, which we try to increase the usage. But also another important element, some of our aircraft are really aging, so we upgrade our fleet to new aircraft. So DHL purchased brand new 777 models, 8 of them in the last year. So also the modernization of fleet will obviously help us to reduce our CO2 footprint. Yeah. Electrify the last mile delivery. So the target is to achieve 60% by 2030. 60% sounds very ambitious because you're only but a worldwide target. And while some countries in the European Union might be further advanced, we have obviously vast areas in underdeveloped countries where the electrification might be really a big challenge. Yeah? And also here, the increase of sustainable fuel for our delivery trucks are obviously very high on the agenda. Yeah? Carbon neutral designs for new buildings. So here again, it's a worldwide topic, and all new facilities that DHL is currently building worldwide all come with a carbon neutral design footprint, which means you use geothermal for heating and cooling, you use solar panels, you talk about very efficient insulation, etc. So also the building design of our facilities, and as you can imagine, we have quite a few, also kicks into this 2030 target. Yeah. Also, what I talked about, the fuel for our aircraft, we also talk about increase of sustainable marine fuel. Here again, we partner very much with shipping lines. So some shipping lines are upgrading their vessels for alternative marine fuels, and that is also obviously a target to achieve for us. Yeah. And obviously, we need to offer green alternatives for all our core products and solutions. I mentioned one thing, obviously, is avoiding air freight by, for example, using the train from Asia into Europe. And it's a very successful concept. We ship thousands of containers every month already on that rule. We offer more and more consolidation services also to not the obvious destinations. Consolidation always means we put multiple shippers in a container or in an aircraft and then optimize the usage. Same goes obviously for the European road freight. So these are a few cornerstones of our sustainability strategy. So what else can we do? So clean fuel and technology, as I mentioned, is the core element for the strategy for the areas where we have to emit CO2. So aircraft have to fly and vessels have to ship unless supply chains really change worldwide. And we talk more about sourcing back to where the consumption is. But we believe globalization will continue, and we believe aircrafts will fly and ships will ship cargo around the world. We just have to decarbonize our service offering there. Yeah. The second element, obviously, and this is also quite common, meanwhile, you can do offsetting. So you can meanwhile calculate with our products that we offer your CO2 emission, and you can offset that, for example, by supporting reforestation, etc., and offsetting your emissions by creating something that is actually reducing the CO2 footprint. And then obviously the optimization comes through supply chain management and design. So imagine with our hundreds of thousands of vehicles worldwide, we still have a lot of opportunities with artificial intelligence to optimize routing, optimize truck load, optimize aircraft load, optimize schedules of all the different transport means when they work together. So that's obviously very, very important. And the element of all of these three is we have to create the transparency. So we have to be able to give a carbon reporting to measure the impact and the result of all of those initiatives. Yeah. So a few examples here. So LCL biofuel solutions. So this is for ocean freight. So for our LCL containers, we offer that already. For FCL and air freight, this solution is currently being rolled out. But also what is unfortunately here worth to be highlighted, a lot of customers believe sustainability will come for free. And I think it's really important to re-emphasize that sustainability, at least in first instance, will increase cost. Yeah, a sustainable fuel costs more than regular fuel, and if customers and companies take that serious and go on that journey, then your overall supply chain might not be cost neutral, at least for the moment. Yeah. But I personally still believe that the overall impact of shipping and the overall environmental impact is not yet calculated today in any shipping costs. And therefore, we believe that the sensitivity for this topic will increase. And we have in particular customers which are in the B2C environment, big fashion retailers, big furniture companies, big automotive companies have the topic of sustainable very high on the agenda, and they are aware that the cost might increase, but it's for them a necessity to further get the buy-in from their end users and customers, where sustainability also has arrived now as a major topic. Yeah. So a few examples on how we do, for example, offsetting. DHL supported a hydropower project in Laos. So there you can generate renewable electricity, you get a certificate for that, it's verified, and then obviously you can use that. Lesotho, we supported with efficient cooking sets, also CO2 saving. Water waste disposal, we have a landfill in Chile where we produce electricity out of landfill gas. So we support these type of projects in order to support the offsetting initiatives, and all of that obviously is certified externally by SGS. So talking about optimization, I mentioned China Rail, I mentioned multimodal solutions, the combination air freight, ocean freight, and our different transport means. And obviously with our IT tools, we can create more transparency also on CO2. So if you sign up to my DHL quote and book, you can get, for example, the full transparency of your CO2 emissions before you book, and you get the comparison, air freight, rail, ocean freight, and then you can choose, or maybe it can influence the transport mode you choose by being aware about the CO2 emissions that your transport will potentially emit. So continue about the reporting. So we provide carbon estimates reports to our customers. We can give a detailed carbon footprint report by lane and by shipment, including air, ocean, rail, for example. And then for future decisions, we have a carbon calculator where you can design entire supply chains and calculate, for example, your carbon footprint as a company for your entire supply chain around the world. Lots of information and artificial intelligence went into these platforms recently. We really talk big data. As I said, we talk about millions of potential shipments that go through these databases at the moment. So that's, I think, the quick overview from my side about the DHL sustainability roadmap. The initial presentation had around like 45 slides. So for the matter of time, really highlighted the core elements. And I hope that with this presentation also amongst you and your customers, I hope that we can increase the further buy-in that transport is not only about the cheapest mode of transport and the cheapest way to get products from A to B, but on long term, we have to think about a sustainable way that also our children and their children in the future can enjoy the world as it is now. So thank you very much for your interest.
Thanks a lot, Ralf. I noted that DHL actually is one of the largest, aviation companies in the world. If I got it right, 290 aircraft. But I'm also curious to discuss later on a bit with you the potential for rail transport, rail logistics here in the GCC. Not at least as I forgot to mention that DB is engaged in a very successful joint venture here in the UAE, namely in Abu Dhabi. But before we come to the topic of rail and rail transportation, it has been mentioned already that Jörg Sonne is with us. Jörg is the managing director of the area Arabian Gulf of Hapag-Lloyd. Needless to introduce Hapag-Lloyd to the participants. They are the ones with the orange labeled containers that I see every day. Jörg, looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Well, not just orange containers, also green containers. But okay, well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you for IWS and AHK. And thank you for the speakers. And for me, we talked a lot about air freight as well as trucking and rail now to ocean freight. 90% of world's cargo gets moved by ocean. Hapag-Lloyd is the 5th largest container shipping company in the world. We have about 240 ships and move about 1 million containers a month by freight, only containers. We don't have any other type of cargo vessels. The presentation is a bit older, as you can see from March. It doesn't matter much, nothing has changed since. We're in exactly the same position we are in at that same time this year. If you don't mind, please go to the next presentation. Next slide. So I don't know who's changing the slides. Is it me? No. Yeah, and so what I'm going to cover this very briefly is where is this industry coming from? What caused the mess that we're in today right now? There's a lot in the news right now on containers being delayed. And to a degree that we haven't seen before. So container shipping is now in the mainstream news. Then before that, it was not really something anybody paid great attention to. If you go to the next slide, please, then I can go into a bit more detail here. So where are we coming from? We had a similar crisis as Corona in 2008 and 9, which was a financial crisis. That was a bit different then, because what that resulted in is less demand for container shipping. At the same time, there was a very large new building order book, up to 40% of then the existing container fleet. We do not have that right now. Right now, there's a very low order book. That means there aren't any new ships that are being built right now that are coming to service anytime soon. At the same time, we have a lot of demand, and we have had years of consolidation. So there's a whole lot less shipping companies around than there were in the years of financial crisis some 13 years ago. And overall, as we moved into the Corona crisis already, we had supply demand a whole lot more balanced than it was at any time before that. If you go to the next slide, please. So what are the three big things that drive supply demand in container shipping right now? It's in the second half of the year of 2020, we had a very large surge in demand that spilled over into the first half of this year, when everybody thought this might end at some stage, but along the thinking of how many times can you refurbish your house and how much garden furniture does anybody really need. This demand is carrying well into 2021 second half. Also a big concern are container terminals, not so much container shipping companies that cannot handle all this additional business. They could barely, some of them could barely do before Corona, and they cannot do right now. And on top of this, we have a container shortage, which I will tell you about. I will tell you about all these containers went to. This is one of the things that our customers ask us every day. How can I move cargo now? Next slide, please. So why is demand so high? As I said before, people with the lockdowns improved their lives. So instead of spending money on services such as going to the movies or going to dinner, you now upgrade your home. You bought new garden furniture and bicycles and PlayStations and toys and games, and we all have done puzzling at home with our families. So this is all things that drove a lot of increase in demand. At the same time, there's a lot of government support, and in many countries that is only filtering through now. So money is being pumped into the economy. At the same time, people haven't spent much money on services such as holidays, so there is money that they still have available and did spend and are still spending on goods. And this is what we do as a shipping company. We don't have any cinema tickets on offer, but we ship cargo. So there's a lot of demand on additional shipping. And at the same time, also what happened in the COVID period is that people didn't have a lot of inventories. And so running very low inventories and then having to restock was an additional surge on top of it. So these are the three main reasons why there's such a high demand on shipping right now. So from the second half of last year well into the start of this year. If you go to the next slide, please. So why there's so many big ships outside the ports? We now have all of this. What is on here? Nothing much has really changed. We now have also in South China a big fiasco around the Yantian port, where the authorities locked down the port because of increase in COVID cases. That then means that there's less shortage, there's less labor, then the trucks cannot move in, then there is a waiting time, then you cannot get the empty container in, but you need to go full container out. So there is a lot of this, and that is on top of a 20% increase in volume. So there's much more volume. At the same time, terminals struggle to keep up their productivity because of restrictions that came about as a result of COVID. Then there have also been strikes here and there that all doesn't really help. And then you see the bunching as a result of the Ever Given, for example. That doesn't help if it doesn't go in this constant flow, but nothing coming for some time and a big bulge at the end of all of this. So this is nowhere near over. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what this has meant is a lot of very unhappy customers for us in the industry, and a big problem for our customers, because as ships are waiting to see the bottom, they wait more the higher the less reliable our vessel schedules are. So the more ships are waiting around ports in cargo, the more ships are running late, the more we miss connections also. So we have right now a product which is very expensive and very unreliable. Of course, that doesn't make happy customers, and it's something that I will run you through in the next few slides to tell you what this all means and what we do about that. Can you go to the next slide, please? So why is the shortage of containers on top of all of this? Well, if the containers move slower because they're stuck in some inland place and cannot move back to the seaport, then you miss the vessel of the seaport. That effectively means we need more containers. So for us, that is meant about 20% less containers available. And even though with higher utilization rate of about 6%, it means that there's less containers available. We're building more, like many others, but you can't do that so easily because factories are also having COVID restrictions, and the material that they need have restrictions, and the laborers are not easily available. So it's all not so easy to just build a whole lot more ships and a whole lot more empty containers. So as a result, there are many parts of the world less empty containers available, like there is less space on ships available due to them not moving fast enough, the containers and the ships, and also the demand being extraordinarily high right now. We go to the next slide, please. So what are we doing to address this? We use alternative routings through less congested ports where possible. As in Asia, you have alternatives like in Yantian, for example. Many parts of the world you do not have. You bypass congested ports, which we do all the time. Unfortunately, often also last minute. We use, so for example, we just had a ship that bypassed Jebel Ali on the way from Europe. Then has to go first to Singapore, connect on another service that also is overbooked, and then come back to Jebel Ali, because that is then easily a month transit time. But if you have perishable goods, it's nothing anybody needs. We also use extra loaders. We have extended terminal gate hours where possible, and invested in additional off-dock storage. So there is a lot that we have done in terms of the infrastructure that we have today. And then if you go to the next slide, please, we've also invested in more empty containers, about 10% more that we had the same period in 2019. We just, after this, spent another $500 million on additional containers that we're building right now that should come into effect in the third quarter of this year. so that we have these additional 330,000 extra containers. Sounds like a lot, but it's not if 20% of your fleet are not effectively not being used because they're stuck and are not moving fast enough. If you go to the next slide, please. 2 more slides, I believe. What are we doing also? So overall, we have invested about $1 billion right now in additional ships, as well as the $500 million we've invested in containers. These ships are, as this is also about sustainability, of course, very sustainable because they are very large. Therefore, per container, they are very efficient. They also run on much more engine technology than older ships commonly. But basically, for us and everybody, every shipping company, everything that floats is moving. So there are no ships that are anchored anywhere that you can get today. Charter rates for ships are sky high. If all of us in Germany rented a car, maybe that was more expensive now than last year. Chartering ships is much, much more expensive right now, if you can get it. And next slide, please. Okay, so what will this look like right now? This is my last slide. Also, demand remains super high because of the additional stimulus and the other factors I mentioned before. Inventory levels are really, really low. Happens all the time to everybody. You want to buy something and you can't get it. Want to buy a bicycle in Germany, you can wait an extra half a year because the parts just aren't there. Productivity in ports remains super low. Ships are waiting to get into a port. That is also heavily reported in the media, in Los Angeles or now Yantian or Europe, also here and there. Trucks are not available. Truck drivers don't really want this as a job also necessarily because of COVID. Container availability remains really low. And these backlogs have remained all the way. We always thought that Q3 would be better, but it doesn't really look like it. And customers with fixed contracts suffer less than people that it does a spot deal. Spot is becoming very, very expensive right now. If you can get the space, it becomes also less predictable, which is so bad in parts that, as you heard from Rolf before, that you also trucking containers now availing and trucking even containers from China all the way to Europe. And rates will keep on increasing as there just isn't enough supply to carry the very high demand we see there. Yeah, so on that, thank you very much. That's a quick overview of where we are in the shipping industry right now and what are sort of the drivers behind the very high rates and the unpredictability of shipping.
Thank you very much, dear Jörg. Somehow we lost your video in between, but at least we can hear you. So, well, I'm looking forward to maybe elaborate on some of the aspects that you mentioned. I've read just yesterday that the daily charter rates for container ships have been more than tripled within the last couple of months. So it sounds like a good business for the ones owning the ships. I'm turning now to Jon Norvald Haugen. I'm wondering if the rates have been developing as dynamically for Lufthansa Cargo. Jon, great to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. My presentation will basically go exactly onto that topic on basically supply and demand of air cargo capacities. And I will have a short look at pre-COVID supply and demand dynamics, supply and demand dynamics during COVID. And also I will have a look into the glass bowl and make some bold predictions about the future. So probably you have my presentation, right? You can help me share it.
I need to turn to my dear colleagues Kerstin and Caro. So I hear them working in the background. Jon, maybe you just...
I can just start. So Lufthansa Cargo, obviously it's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Lufthansa Group. We are marketing, selling air cargo capacity for Lufthansa German Airlines, Brussels Airlines, Austrian Airlines, and Eurowings Discover, plus a few regional airlines. We have joint ventures with ANA, with Cathay Pacific, with United, and we also have a joint venture cargo airline together with the DHL Express called Aerologic, and basically located in around 100 countries around the globe. So if you can move to the next slide. So basically, I got this from my friends at IATA, and I think it's a very nice picture to get an overview of what supply and demand, the supply and demand of air cargo capacity looks like at the moment. You have the light blue on the chart on the left. The light blue line is demand, whilst the dark blue is supply. And like it normally is with supply and demand, if your supplying capacity and it's a higher demand than available capacity is normally good news for those selling or supplying that capacity. And that's clearly the case during the COVID period. As you can see on the right-hand side of that chart, there's a huge gap between supply and demand, which not only us in air freight, but as also was described by some of the previous speakers, has in general been good for the profitability of the entire supply chain. And talking about basically this crisis versus other crises, it was also mentioned earlier. What is quite special with this crisis is what you see on the right-hand side. The right chart is the drop of where air cargo capacity is being shipped. Pre-COVID, you basically had more or less a 50-50 split between what was carried on traditional passenger aircrafts and what was transported on freighter dedicated aircrafts. As you see of April 2020, you had a drop of passenger capacity close to 80%. And although obviously you will have a reaction to that in terms of an influx of freighter capacity, is nowhere near covering the gap caused by this crisis. So you can move on to the next slide. That's more or less now the status quo. And then trying to look a bit at some economic indicators that we normally see is quite closely linked to the demand we see for air cargo. Obviously, the export is already on record levels from China. If you look at to the far left of the slide, you see the fall and the rise of the Chinese export revenues was extreme, short, and has recovered probably beyond many of our expectations. As also mentioned by the previous speaker, we also see the inventory to sales ratio obviously now developing in a very positive way. So obviously sales dropped during the first lockdown in the US, a big import market for us. Obviously inventories stopped being refilled, even empty, and we saw just a general fear of restocking even when markets started to kind of open back up. But we see obviously a very positive trend in this segment as well. And last but not least, from Germany, our home market, we also see a very positive expectations from the manufacturer in terms of export expectations going into 2021 and into the future. So you can move to the next slide, and I will bring it down more to an industry level. I picked out 3 specific industries which are historically quite heavy users of air freight capacities. Obviously automotive to the left on the slide. In 2020, we actually already in September surpassed the global export volumes of automotive versus 2019, already September. So the development was already strong during the last year, and it continues strong into 2021, and we expect it to remain strong throughout the year. Looking at another big segment, the pharma segment, 2020 was pretty closely, evenly matched with 2019 in terms of global exports and tonnage. But we do see already now and expect during 2021 this segment to have a strong growth up towards 15, some even suggest 20% versus 2020. So another segment which is showing clear growth trends. And last but not least, also mentioned a couple of times today, the e-commerce segment, where basically volumes will continue to grow within air freight, and basically a revenue of e-commerce as well will increase. And if you look at the bottom of that slide to the right, you see the growth in cross-border e-commerce on a year-on-year basis, and the growth figures are just tremendous. So it will be definitely one of the leading industry sectors for air freight also going into the future. Now, obviously, I talked about the status quo. I talked about some economic indicators. I talked about some industry trends. So now let's put it all together in my last slide, and I will boldly try and predict how the air freight future will look like. And I will put the remark here that obviously I cannot predict the future. So take this with a grain of salt. But putting all these things together, I think can at least give us some indications of where we're heading. And if we go back to my baseline now, which is 2019, where we had a split between the different capacity modes being belly capacity and freighter capacity, we already see in 2020 that those dynamics changed. A lot moved over to freighter capacity, up towards 80% of the flown air cargo, which you see in the dark blue, and you see the belly capacity in the gray. And on top, you see the supply and demand gap, which I talked about in the initial slide. And so here's the million-dollar question: how much freighter capacity will come back into the market to cover this supply and demand gap? And if you look at this slide, you see that the freighter capacity from 2021 onwards is rather stable, and despite there being a supply and demand gap. And there's a couple of reasons for that, because obviously a lot of the freighter capacity we currently see in the market are not traditional freighter aircrafts. They're passenger aircrafts that only operate with belly capacity, or they're converted aircrafts, which eventually, in most cases, we believe will return to their passenger mission. And at the same time, we will see obviously additional capacity come into the market via new airplanes. We will also see some of these converter freighters remain as freighters, but we don't believe that we will have a much higher volume of freighter capacity than what we have currently. The additional capacity from now until 2025, we believe will mainly come via the belly capacities, which again leads, if I go to the end of that slide, you see 2025 as the end of this prediction. You see the balance between cargo going on freighter capacity and going on belly capacity have changed, the ratio between the two. And this is a very much looking into a glass bowl, but at the end of the day, we see the top management of all major airlines talking about how how slow the passenger business will come back. And when it comes back, they talk about the new normal, which is more leisure driven than business traveler driven. And the thing about air cargo is that air cargo tend to go where the business traveler goes. Out of the top of my head, there is more cargo potential in Nairobi than in Kilimanjaro. But if the passenger demand would go to Kilimanjaro, the flights will most likely go to Kilimanjaro as well. So we believe that actually this additional freighter capacity we see in the market today will be needed going forward. So that's my bold prediction, and I'm more than happy to discuss it. Thank you very much, and back to you, Oliver.
Thanks a lot, Jon. If I got it right, I also saw that from 2019 to 2025, you are predicting a growth of air cargo of about nearly 20%. So that's quite impressive and is already counter-arguing the first question that I would, let's say, drop on the floor. It's related to the subject of nearshoring, which has been mentioned by Beat Timmermans already. So that's something that has been in the room for a couple of months now. It's a theory that due to the, let's say, disruption or disruptions in different supply chains that we have been witnessing actually until right now, some industries might consider to bring some parts of the value chain closer to where headquarters is, for instance, in the automotive industry. So for me as a dummy, it sounds like an opportunity for DB Cargo, but it sounds maybe like a threat for people connecting East Asia to Europe, like Jörg from Hapag-Lloyd. Maybe I ask somebody who might be just between the two poles, Ralf Schreiber, talking about nearshoring. Is this something that you would see as a threat, an opportunity? And secondly, what might it mean for the UAE, the Gulf region?
So I personally believe that the trend of globalization is not yet over. I still believe that we will continue manufacturing in China. We might see alternatives coming up in Vietnam for the high-tech industry. You'll see maybe fashion and garments moving from China or Bangladesh to Ethiopia in future. But I don't see that the nearshoring is a threat for the global logistics industry, which includes the airlines, the shipping lines, and the forwarders. In fact, DHL is having this global trend radar, and we believe that the globalization will not come to a standstill and will continue with the current trend as is. Will there be changes in the supply chain? Maybe yes. Will there be more buffer stocks set up eventually? Will the timeliness, the critical timeliness of supply chain, for example, in the automotive industry, have a review, and transport concepts might change? This for sure might happen. But as a general trend, the globalization and the global trends we see, I think, will continue as they are now.
Okay, that's very straightforward. As promised, I would like to integrate Mohsen Ahmad into the discussion. Mohsen, I know that you have been in the industry. You mentioned it for 2 decades already. Do you see the role of the UAE as a hub for the region at large changing, and what has Dubai South to offer in this regard?
Yeah, I think, Oliver, in terms of UAE's position, I think traditionally everybody was looking at UAE sort of just a gateway to the GCC. But we did this study a few years ago, trying to look at positioning UAE as a more of a Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia as sort of a hub. And the reason is because of the connectivities, like the gentlemen who are on this panel, that they provide, or all the others who are in the same domain, being it air freight or the sea freight. I think that's where UAE's position is strong. I think they continue to be developing more of the routes. Just one example was always like more multinationals would put Singapore as sort of the gateway to India, but alternatively, Dubai has much more network connectivity to India than Singapore. And I think that's one area to be looked at, which is there. Now, also in terms of when it comes to the speed, obviously with all sort of most of our national carriers being the Emirates Sky Cargo or Etihad or sort of the Air Arabia and Fly Dubai, and not to mention that most of the sort of the integrators like the DHL and FedEx and UPS have sort of a hub in Dubai that makes it a very strong position from a regional perspective.
Thank you very much. There's one question raised by Detlef Dawes. So he's wondering, do you see the trend of clients being willing to share data for better prediction? I assume prediction in terms of securing supply chains, making sure that products are delivered in time. So that's an interesting question. Who would like to respond to that? So the topic of buffer stocks has been mentioned by Ralf. Obviously, this goes hand in hand.
So maybe I can take the data topic up as well. Yeah, it's a mixed picture. So obviously the digitalization is on everybody's agenda. So how to exchange information, be it shipment information that we, for example, feed directly into the ERP systems of our customers, or be it invoice data that we meanwhile submit electronically. So the paper invoice is also an outdated product. So here, obviously, I see that that digitalization and the opportunity to share data is very high. What I still do not yet see that the fully integrated, I would say, supply and demand planning that our customers took us demand planning that would allow us to better plan then with Jörg's and with Jörg's ships and the Lufthansa aircraft to better plan the supply chain. Here, I still think there's still a long way to improve. So we are not yet there, but there are obviously examples, for example, out of the automotive industry, where the third-party logistics provider are very well aware of the manufacturing plan of that particular site and coordinate then the supply accordingly. So I would say you cannot say in general no, but it's definitely different by industry. Some industry are more advanced and include their providers in their supply planning, and some industries still plan this without their suppliers.
Jörg.
Yeah, can I add to this maybe? Yeah, in terms of digitization, there has been a lot of change in the Middle East in all our offices in terms of how customers interact with us, exchange documents as well as money. What has not really changed, and that is a bit of a learning curve also, is the sort of the forecasting and sort of talking about business in a bit more detail. There was never a need also in the Middle East before. It's a trading community, and there was always space and ships next week. So there was no real need for long-term planning. That is changing now quite a bit. So we're talking to customers about much more long-term commitments. So in terms of exchanging information about your customer's business, that definitely is changing, although maybe it could be a bit faster here and there.
Thank you, Jörg. I think Detlef, you wanted to contribute?
Yes, if I can just add something. I mean, we have a similar issue in MRO demand planning. So predictability of keeping the lifestyle of an industrial plant, and it's a real challenge. And I think it starts with this trading mentality of the Middle East. Don't put your eggs in one basket. And now to share data, and I think it's really one of our biggest challenges. I think we are not getting this shocks of the demand is higher than the supply if we are not increasing the willingness of the customer to share data. And maybe we can explore this also in another workshop or so. How can we convince customers to share data and decrease cost? I mean, this will also add at the end to the carbon footprint.
Can I add something to that, maybe, because that actually hits one of the topics of today, where we say, and I think the logistic industry is now looking at more resilience in supply chains. With more and more shocks coming to the system, you need a kind of resilience, a kind of shock breaker. And as Ralph says, it's either through buffers, and having buffers all over the place, which we tried to take away the last 10 years. So, or it's by sharing data. So either you share data or you fill the world with buffers, I would say. And buffers also come at a cost. So I would assume that, and some industries are further than others, and in particular, steel industry, automotive industry, I would say less trading oriented and a bit more manufacturing oriented, put a lot of value in this data exchange as an in order just to make the system more resilient.
It's a very important discussion. I know that Detlef Douwes is very passionate about inventory management. It's something we have been both discussing multiple times. But looking at the time, we only have a couple of minutes left. Let me maybe discuss the remaining time more about the topic of sustainability. From the presentations of Ralf and also Pierre Timmermans, we understood that the two companies have been investing a lot actually into their own assets, turning them to be more sustainable. A topic which has hardly been mentioned, at least I might have overheard it, is the use of possibly green hydrogen as the fuel of the future. Is this something that DB is looking into, dear Pierre?
Well, we aim to have all of our transport green within the next couple of years, so that all of the electricity that we use to run our trains is produced one way or another in a green manner. And we call and today even customers, and some customers, it is on customers' request. And for instance, our good friends and joint cooperators of DHL already participate in this one in several products. That we have a product that's called Eco Plus, with a guarantee with certificates of only green electricity flowing into our locomotives, etc. So for us to pass on this certificate, for instance, in the cooperation we have with DHL today, so they can pass it on to their customers. So yes.
Thank you very much. Same question addressed to Jörg. I know that some of the, let's say, new generation engines or motors of ships can already take hydrogen, not at least green hydrogen. But talking about costs, is this something that the customers would be able and willing to swallow?
Hydrogen, no. We have one vessel we just converted to LNG, which is now running Asia to Europe. Just to try things out. This was the first company that actually converted a ship. So others are new builds that are then LNG vessels. We had a normal vessel burning normal bunkers that now has been converted to LNG. Overall, do customers pay for this? I think it's depending on which customer you ask. There are customers, without mentioning names, that yes, pay for this, mainly European customers that pay for CO2 certificates ultimately, and there aren't very many though. I can count them in my customer base maybe on one hand. Most customers still want cheap, and they get containers from ATB on time. And is this situation right now that we're in, that is by far the most important challenge for customers, is to get cargo moving much more than the CO2 footprint. Although there are, as I said, a handful of customers that also look at this long term, not just a short-term investment. But there aren't that many yet, at least in this region.
Thank you very much. Same question, similar, different means of transportation to Jon. Talking about, let's say, green fuels or hydrogen in the aviation industry, a little bit still science fiction, but as you have been looking into the glass ball already, how would the customers deal with it?
No, well, the science fiction, I wouldn't say it is. We do have a 100% CO2 neutral flight going from Frankfurt to Shanghai on a weekly basis with our partners at DB Schenker. But as mentioned from my dear colleague from DGF, the big question is there is a lot of talk, but is there a willingness to also pay for these green solutions, because they are very expensive, no doubt about it. And I think that from our side as an airline, the major contributions we can do within sustainability, obviously it goes on fleet renewal, but there is no CO2 neutral flights at the moment. So you have to do it via sustainable aviation fuel, CO2 offsetting. You have to do it via various initiatives, whether it's getting rid of documents or whatever it might be, incentives of giving CO2 certificates also to customers. But I think we are still quite away from the point where we actually receive or that the CO2 emission will be a decisive factor of an RFQ. I think at the RFI is probably still in there, but on the RFQ probably we're some years away. Yes.
Thank you very much. I think this concludes very nicely our discussion. If I may wrap it up, which is a challenge indeed. I understand there's no CO2 neutral means of transportation, at least cargo transportation right now. We are not yet sure if nearshoring will happen. We see that there might be possible spillovers for my host country, the UAE, and the region at large. We all agree at least that the topic of supply chain management still requires a second and a third and a fourth maybe round of discussion, including representatives of industry. We have been talking about the topic of resilience of supply chains again here in the young region, if I may quote Mohsen Ahmad of the UAE. That's something where the UAE and the Gulf region might play a more important role. And last but not least, and I would like to recur to the initial statement by Pierre Timmermans, let's see what the Green Deal of the European Commission will bring. That's a humongous undertaking, which definitely will come with costs, and this also has been mentioned by Pierre. So thank you very much for my two co-organizers from DIHK, represented by Detlef Daus and Philipp André. And of course, also to IWS, represented by Dr. Federico Fodas and Nina von den Busch, also to Peter Nussbaum, who has been with us in the beginning at least. I wish you all a pleasant week for those of you joining us from Germany, and a pleasant rest of the week for the ones speaking to you or joining from the UAE. Have a nice afternoon and see you very soon. Bye-bye.